The Duke found his dead wife working as a seamstress, beside a 7-year-old boy who shared his eyes. The winter of 1816 had left the Ashbourne estate draped in frost, a brittle silence settling across its sprawling lawns and towering evergreens. The Duke of Ashbourne, a man whose life had been meticulously arranged by duty and societal expectation, returned at last to the family seat, his boots crunching over the hardened snow with a rhythm that echoed the heavy beat of his heart. 7 years had passed since the tragedy that stole his wife, the fiery scandal that whispered her death through every drawing room and tavern alike. And yet, as he approached the wrought iron gates, the estate seemed to mourn with him, icicles hanging like the delicate, accusatory fingers of memory from every gutter and balcony. Inside, the corridors smelled of aged wood and fading lavender, the remnants of a home once vibrant with laughter now subdued by the weight of absence. Servants hurried quietly, glancing up at him with a mixture of awe and caution. The Duke had returned, yes, but the shadow of his grief had preceded him. Gossip, that persistent companion, had already begun to wind its way through the estate. Whispers of his solitary walks and somber carriage rides had reached every corner, and now murmurs of a stranger in the east wing reached him as he crossed the grand hall, the flames of the fireplace casting fractured light across portraits of forebears who regarded him with stern, painted eyes. It was there, in that eastern wing, that he first glimpsed her. She moved with an unassuming grace, bending over a length of silk that gleamed softly under the lamplight, her fingers deft and precise, handling the delicate fabric as though it were an extension of herself. The Duke paused, his breath caught somewhere between disbelief and hope, a sensation that made his chest ache with an unfamiliar intensity. Her hair, a shade darker than he remembered, framed a face both familiar and altered by years of hidden trials. She did not notice him at first, entirely absorbed in the rhythm of her work, the sound of scissors cutting the fabric like a subtle accompaniment to a silent symphony of memory. He could not step forward immediately. The years of protocol and societal expectation weighed upon him like a physical barrier. This woman, a seamstress for the local gentry, could not, would not, be the Duchess he had mourned. Yet, every carefully measured step, every tilt of her head, every delicate movement of her hands stirred something within him that he could neither name nor suppress. He remembered the way she once carried herself in the grand halls, the dignity that had drawn the eyes of every nobleman in England. The resemblance was impossible to dismiss. In a cruel twist of fate, the woman before him bore the unmistakable aura of the wife he had long buried in grief and memory. A sudden sound drew her attention, and their eyes met. For a heartbeat, the room froze in a tableau of recognition and unspoken questions. The Duke's heart faltered. She lowered her gaze politely, yet there was a flicker, subtle, almost imperceptible, that spoke of familiarity, of shared history, and perhaps of secrets too dangerous to voice. He felt the sting of shame, an acute awareness of the impropriety of lingering here, staring at a servant in her place of labor, while the world outside expected him to mourn quietly and maintain the dignity of his house. Every instinct, every lesson in decorum, screamed for restraint, yet curiosity, hope, and something deeper, an ache he had buried along with her memory, propelled him forward, a cautious step toward an impossible truth. The seamstress, for her part, composed herself with impeccable poise. Her movements resumed their gentle rhythm, yet there was a tension in the line of her shoulders, a slight quiver in the set of her jaw, that betrayed her awareness. Perhaps she had anticipated this meeting, or perhaps fate had conspired to bring them together once more. Whatever the cause, she worked with a precision that belied the turmoil flickering behind her eyes. It was clear she understood the stakes. One misstep, one word, and the fragile veil of her current life could shatter under the weight of scandal and speculation. As the Duke watched, a new sound drew his attention, a soft, laughter-like murmur, innocent and unassuming. A child emerged from behind the half-closed door, a boy of 7, holding a wooden horse that had seen better days. The resemblance was uncanny. The storm-gray eyes, the proud arch of the brow, the subtle tilt of the head, they mirrored his own features with a precision that sent a shock through him. He felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest, a mixture of awe, fear, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. The child smiled innocently, unaware of the tangled web of identity, grief, and social expectation that hung between the adults. The Duke's mind raced, torn between societal duty and private longing. To speak would be to risk scandal, to confirm the impossible, to acknowledge a truth that the world might not accept. Yet to remain silent was equally torturous. The sight of her, alive and unbowed, the child at her side, stirred a tumult of emotion that defied reason. Every principle he had clung to, dignity, honor, the rigid hierarchy of rank, felt suddenly inadequate in the face of this revelation. The walls of the room seemed to close in, candlelight flickering across faces that were at once familiar and new, past and present colliding with startling clarity. He drew a breath, deliberate and measured, seeking the restraint that society demanded of him. "Your Grace," she said softly, finally lifting her gaze in proper acknowledgement, her voice composed yet carrying the weight of years spent in concealment. The words struck him, formal yet intimate, polite yet layered with emotion. In that single moment, he recognized the woman he had loved and lost, and yet a chasm of years and secrets yawned between them, filled with unspoken questions and the perilous possibility of scandal. For a moment, the Duke considered leaving, retreating to the familiar corridors of duty and grief, to the life he had known in the absence of her presence. And yet, something deeper compelled him to remain, to witness, to measure, to understand. He would need answers, and so would the world if ever this revelation came to light. But for now, he stood silently, the tension between recognition and propriety suspended like the delicate threads she wove through the fabric beneath her fingers. Outside, the wind whispered against the windows, carrying the faint scent of snow and evergreens, a reminder that the world beyond the estate continued in its relentless march. Within, time seemed to stretch, bending around the improbable tableau of a duke, a seamstress, and a child who bore the same storm-gray eyes as himself. The first sparks of curiosity, longing, and fear had ignited, and the course of their intertwined lives had shifted irreversibly. And so the Duke of Ashbourne lingered, his presence a silent accusation, a question unanswered, a promise of discovery to come. In that quiet chamber, beneath the soft glow of candlelight and the watchful eyes of portraits long past, the impossible had been revealed, and the first delicate threads of a new, fragile story had begun to weave themselves into the tapestry of their lives. The winter of 1816, harsh and unyielding, had already sown the seeds of scandal, recognition, and the enduring, unspoken pull of love. The days that followed the Duke's quiet observation in the East Wing were laden with an unspoken tension that neither time nor propriety could dispel. The Ashbourne estate, with its high arched windows and polished parquet floors, seemed to pulse with a life of its own, aware of secrets too delicate to be spoken aloud. Snow had melted into a persistent drizzle, each drop tracing rivulets along the stone pathways and into the garden where frost still clung stubbornly to the last of the winter roses. Within the estate, servants moved with a careful discretion that bordered on reverence. They whispered behind half-closed doors, their glances darting toward the Duke as though their very sight might uncover the impossible truth. The seamstress, for her part, maintained a careful rhythm, her hands deftly threading needles, adjusting hems and pressing folds into the silken gowns for the visiting gentry. Yet beneath this surface of industrious calm, a subtle tension pervaded her movements, betraying the awareness that each stitch, each measured gesture, might reveal far more than intended. She kept her eyes lowered when the Duke entered the room, yet every now and then, the faintest flicker of recognition passed through her gaze, like the trembling reflection of candlelight upon water. The Duke, in turn, lingered near the doorway, studying the boy who played quietly in the corner, his wooden horse clutched firmly in both hands. The child's storm-gray eyes, the proud set of his brow, mirrored his own with uncanny precision, sending a quiet tremor through his chest that was equal parts awe and dread. On the third morning of his clandestine observations, a small token appeared on the work table, a ribbon, delicate and embroidered with tiny floral motifs. It was of a hue the Duke recognized immediately, a soft blue that his wife had once worn during the summer fete at Ashbourne Hall. His fingers trembled slightly as he lifted it, careful not to disturb the seamstress or the child. She looked up at that moment, her gaze locking with his in a silent acknowledgement of shared memory. A subtle blush rose to her cheeks, faint yet undeniable, and the Duke felt a surge of longing intertwined with the sharp pang of shame. To see such a personal token, so carefully preserved, was to confront the impossible reality that the woman before him had endured years of concealment with dignity intact. It was during the afternoon that the first hints of scandal reached the Duke's ears. A letter, delivered by a breathless footman, bore the seal of a neighbor whose curiosity exceeded discretion. The missive hinted at whispered rumors circulating through the county, claims of a mysterious seamstress whose resemblance to the late Duchess was unsettlingly precise. The Duke's jaw tightened as he read the words, a mixture of irritation and fear constricting his chest. The world beyond the estate, with its rigid social hierarchy and prying eyes, was already poised to judge, to gossip, to condemn. And yet, the Duke could not deny the thread of exhilaration that ran through him. In these whispered insinuations lay both danger and opportunity, a chance to navigate the treacherous waters of society while safeguarding the fragile truth of what he had witnessed. The seamstress, too, was not ignorant of the rising stakes. She moved with increased deliberation, folding fabrics with precision, ensuring that her modest attire never betrayed the elegance of the woman she had once been. Her voice, when she spoke, was measured and polite, each word chosen with care, each sentence an exercise in controlled expression. "Your Grace," she said one afternoon, acknowledging him with the customary bow, "the embroidery requires attention, lest the guests find fault in the presentation of their attire." There was no hint of weakness in her tone, no plea or hesitation, only the quiet authority of someone accustomed to navigating the constraints of both social station and personal peril. The child, meanwhile, was an unspoken bridge between them, a living reminder of a past they could neither ignore nor fully claim. He wandered closer to the Duke one morning, his small hand brushing against the hem of the silk gown as if guided by instinct rather than conscious thought. The Duke bent slightly, keeping his voice low, careful not to frighten the boy. "And who might you be, young master?" he asked, a careful note of inquiry masking the tumult within. The boy's eyes, bright and unyielding, met his own, and in that instant the Duke's understanding crystallized. This child was not merely a resemblance or a trick of memory. He was proof, living and breathing, of the woman's secret years and the impossible life she had led. It was then that the first overt challenge arose. Lady Beatrice, a distant cousin of the Duke, arrived unexpectedly, her eyes sharp with the curiosity and cunning that defined her presence in every drawing-room and garden gathering. She observed the seamstress with thinly veiled scrutiny, commenting upon the quality of her work while carefully noting the subtle elegance of her posture and the grace of her hands. The Duke's pulse quickened, awareness of the delicate line between revelation and scandal tightening like a cord around his ribs. The lady's visit was polite, formal, and yet tinged with the unmistakable scent of suspicion, and as she departed, the whispers of potential gossip lingered like frost upon the windows. Despite the external pressures, small gestures of recognition and tenderness began to emerge. A carefully folded gown left near the child's play area carried a scent faintly reminiscent of the Duchess's favorite perfume, vanilla and rosewater, subtle and evocative. The Duke noticed, and a quiet acknowledgment passed between them, unspoken but charged with meaning. Each token, each gesture, became a delicate dance of revelation and concealment, a negotiation of hearts and memories weighed against the rigid expectations of society. Evenings were spent in careful observation and silent deliberation. The Duke walked the halls in solitude, contemplating the impossible reunion before him, and yet he was drawn inexorably back to the East Wing. Candlelight flickered across his hands as he adjusted the folds of the silk or the placement of a ribbon, each action heavy with implication. The seamstress moved with measured calm, never breaking the rhythm of her work yet acutely aware of his presence, her subtle nods and fleeting glances weaving a language of intimacy known only to them. The child, oblivious to the stakes of propriety, remained a quiet anchor, a living proof of love's endurance despite years of absence and societal expectation. By the close of the week, tension had escalated to a palpable intensity. Letters of inquiry from neighboring estates hinted at the appearance of a seamstress whose resemblance to the late Duchess had not gone unnoticed. Servants exchanged furtive glances and hushed remarks, careful to speak only in whispers lest the truth, or a dangerous approximation of it, reach ears that would not understand discretion. The Duke, standing in the candlelit chamber, felt the weight of society pressing upon him even as his heart recognized the impossible joy before him. The stage was set for confrontation, revelation, and the delicate negotiation of love, honor, and secrecy. And so, with tokens of memory carefully preserved, whispers of scandal beginning to circulate, and the subtle dance of recognition unfolding in quiet glances and embroidered ribbons, the Duke and the seamstress navigated a fragile equilibrium. Each gesture, each shared look, was a step along the narrow path between propriety and desire, between the scrutiny of a judgmental society and the undeniable truth of their hearts. As the day drew to a close, the Duke lingered near the work table, observing her hands as they moved with a practiced grace, and the child's eyes, wide with innocent curiosity. The world beyond the walls of Ashbourne might not yet understand, and society would judge, speculate, and whisper, but within the chamber, the first threads of a new and perilous story were being woven, threads of recognition, tension, and the quiet but unrelenting pull of love rediscovered. The evening descended upon Ashbourne Estate with the slow, deliberate grace of a candle guttering in the draught of a grand hall. Rain tapped softly against the leaded windows, a steady accompaniment to the rhythmic crackle of the fireplace that cast amber light across polished floors. The Duke of Ashbourne moved quietly through the corridors, each step measured, each breath weighed with the burden of unspoken questions. In the east wing, where candlelight flickered against walls lined with sketches, fabric and pressed lace, the seamstress worked with meticulous care, unaware at first of his arrival. Yet the moment the door closed behind him, the room seemed to constrict, the air thick with anticipation, the hush of years pressing upon them both. He stood silently for a moment, observing her, the precise motion of her hands, the way her eyes occasionally lifted to the boy who played quietly at her side, and the faint tension in the set of her shoulders. The child, storm-gray eyes wide in curiosity, looked up and smiled innocently, unaware of the magnitude of what hovered between the adults. It was the weight of those eyes, so like his own, that made the Duke's chest tighten, as though the truth had been carried on a gale into the very center of his being. The room seemed suspended between past and present, and he understood that no words could be idle or wasted. Every syllable must carry the gravity of recognition and restraint. "My lord," she said softly, her voice a tempered note, careful, formal, yet threaded with the faintest tremor. She did not rise, but the tilt of her head, the set of her hands, spoke volumes. "You find me in my labor as I have done for many seasons past. I trust the work is satisfactory?" He stepped closer, the polished wood of the floor cool beneath his boots, his eyes never leaving hers. "Satisfactory," he murmured, but the single word was heavy with a mixture of disbelief and longing. "I cannot deny what I see, yet I fear my senses deceive me. Tell me truly, how is it that you stand here before me, alive, when I have mourned you for 7 winters?" Her fingers froze mid-stitch, the needle hovering above the delicate silk. She drew a measured breath and finally lifted her gaze, steady now, resolute despite the vulnerability that shimmered beneath the surface. "I am here, my lord, because circumstances demanded concealment. The carriage accident was real, yet survival required secrecy. To return to you openly would have invited questions, scandal and ruin, not for me alone but for our child." Her voice was firm, yet threaded with sorrow, each word carefully weighed, a precise measure of honesty tempered by the need for discretion. The Duke felt his knees weaken, as if the room itself had grown heavier, the flame of the fireplace casting shifting shadows that mirrored the turbulence in his heart. "Our child?" he whispered, turning slowly toward the boy who had watched the exchange with wide, uncomprehending eyes. The resemblance, undeniable and stark, struck him with the force of revelation. The child's small hand brushed over the wooden horse again, a gesture so ordinary it made the impossibility of the situation all the more acute. This is our son?" She inclined her head, a mixture of pride and caution in the gesture. "Yes. He has grown under my care, guided by lessons I deemed essential before returning to the life we once knew. The world need not know the truth until we are ready, and even then, prudence may demand discretion." Her words, measured and careful, struck him with the dual weight of relief and frustration. Love had endured, but at the cost of years spent in secrecy, of stolen moments and silent longing. For a long moment, the Duke's gaze traveled between her and the child, his mind a turbulent swirl of emotion. Anger at the cruel twist of fate that had separated them, relief at finding her alive, and an aching desire to bridge the years spent apart coalesced into a singular, almost unbearable intensity. He knelt slightly to meet the child's gaze, careful not to overwhelm him. "I am your father," he said gently, the words simple yet laden with gravity. The boy's eyes, bright and unflinching, mirrored his own in that instant, and a bond, previously only imagined, cemented itself in quiet recognition. The seamstress watched him closely, noting the subtle shifts of expression, the tightening of his jaw, the flutter of his eyelashes, the way his hands, though steady, betrayed the turbulence within. "7 years of absence have not lessened your duty, my lord," she said softly. "Nor has it diminished the care I owe to him, to us, to the lives we must navigate with caution." Each phrase was deliberate, each syllable a careful negotiation between revelation and restraint. She had lived in the shadow of fear and propriety, and yet her words carried the unmistakable cadence of a woman reclaiming the agency of her life. The Duke's hands trembled as he reached for her own, brushing away a stray lock of hair that had escaped its careful braid. "How have you endured such exile?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What strength has carried you through years of concealment, of solitude, while I, faithful, dutiful, believed you lost to me forever?" His question hung in the air, an accusation tempered by awe, a recognition of the resilience that had sustained her. She met his gaze, steady and unwavering, a flicker of warmth breaking through the carefully maintained composure. "Love," she said simply. Love, my lord, has endured where all else might falter. It is both my shield and my guide. And now, it must be our compass, even as we navigate the treacherous waters that await beyond these walls. Her words, gentle yet firm, struck the heart with their clarity, their honesty, their undeniable truth. Outside, the rain continued to patter against the windows, each drop a metronome marking the passage of a night thick with confession and revelation. The child, sensing the significance of the moment though not its full import, leaned closer to his mother, a small hand finding hers and another brushing against the Duke's sleeve in innocent recognition. The room, filled with the warmth of firelight and the quiet scent of lavender, became a sanctuary, a fragile space where love, guilt, longing and hope converged in delicate balance. The Duke's gaze lingered on her, on the life that had been hidden for so long, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself a tentative, almost imperceptible smile. "Then we must tread carefully," he murmured. "Not for the world nor for scandal but for him, for us. The past has bound us together in ways we cannot undo, yet it also grants us the chance to begin anew." She nodded, her eyes reflecting the flickering light of the fire and the unspoken acknowledgement of what lay ahead. "We begin anew," she whispered, and the words, though soft, carried the weight of promise and determination. In that moment, the chamber seemed to breathe with them, a quiet witness to the delicate reclamation of love, the tender acknowledgement of past suffering, and the cautious hope for a future tempered by wisdom and care. Yet even as they lingered in that fragile reconciliation, the faintest sound at the door, a hesitant knock, hurried and uncertain, reminded them that the world beyond the chamber walls remained ever watchful, ever ready to intrude upon their private truths. The tension, though tempered by confession and recognition, had not dissipated. It had only shifted, taking root in a new form, demanding vigilance, courage, and subtlety in equal measure. And so, with hearts tentatively reconciled, hands briefly entwined, and the child's innocent presence anchoring them, the Duke and his wife faced the turning point of their story. The confession had altered everything, yet the path forward remained uncertain, winding between desire and discretion, love and societal expectation. Within the quiet glow of candlelight and the soothing rhythm of falling rain, they lingered, poised at the delicate precipice between revelation and the uncertain journey that lay ahead. The following morning dawned pale and brittle, the Ashbourne estate cloaked in a mist that blurred the edges of reality and memory. Candlelight had been extinguished hours ago, yet the lingering shadows of the night seemed to dance along the corridors, echoing the unspoken truths of the previous evening. The Duke moved through the east wing with deliberate purpose, each step measured, each breath tethered to the fragile hope that the world might yet yield to the quiet authority of love and discretion. The child, storm-gray eyes wide in curiosity, followed at a cautious distance, unaware of the import of the day yet intuitively sensing the solemnity in the Duke's gait. The seamstress, now fully conscious of the inexorable tide of revelation, rose from her work table, smoothing her gown and arranging the folds of silk with care. She met his gaze with a steadiness that belied the storm within, a quiet strength that had carried her through years of exile and secrecy. "The hour has come," she said softly, the words carrying the weight of both resignation and determination. "We can no longer linger in shadow if we wish to reclaim what is ours." Her voice, firm yet tender, spoke of courage born from necessity, a delicate equilibrium of pride and humility that had defined her life since the accident. The Duke approached, every instinct alert to the delicate interplay of propriety and passion. He held her hands in his, the familiar warmth grounding him as if time itself had folded back upon itself to grant this impossible reunion. "You are here alive," he murmured, his voice a mixture of awe and reverence. "And yet, society would see only scandal in what fate has granted us. We must tread carefully yet boldly for the sake of him, for the sake of love that endures." His words, deliberate and measured, resonated through the room, drawing both recognition and understanding. The child, sensing the gravity of the moment, lingered closer, a silent witness to the tender reclamation unfolding before him. It was then that the first overt confrontation arrived. Lady Beatrice, emboldened by curiosity and the faintest glimmer of suspicion, entered the chamber unannounced. Her sharp eyes scanned the room, lingering on the seamstress, on the child, and finally resting on the Duke with the subtle intensity of a predator measuring its prey. "Your Grace," she began, voice laced with insinuation, "one hears remarkable claims of a seamstress whose bearing and demeanor resemble those of your late Duchess. Surely you do not encourage idle tales to flourish?" The room tightened, the air thick with anticipation, yet the Duke's composure remained unshaken, tempered by the inner knowledge of truth that Lady Beatrice had yet to grasp. With measured elegance, he inclined his head. Curiosity, Lady Beatrice, is a trait of which I do not discourage, yet it is prudent to exercise discretion. The claims you speak of are delicate, and the truths they allude to require patience and understanding. His gaze shifted to the seamstress, a silent affirmation of alliance, trust, and shared history. She, in turn, met his eyes, her own reflecting both relief and determination, the unspoken vow that they would face the scrutiny of society together. The child, ever attentive, glanced from one adult to the other, his small hand gripping the Duke's sleeve with innocent conviction, as if lending his silent blessing to the unfolding declaration. The next moments unfolded with deliberate choreography. The Duke, aware that the eyes of society might soon intrude, chose courage over concealment. "It is true," he announced, voice firm and unwavering, "that the woman before us is the lady I once called my wife. Fate and circumstance have concealed her presence from the world, yet she stands here, whole and resolute, and with her the child who is my heir, my son." The words, simple in structure yet monumental in consequence, reverberated through the chamber, settling like a tide that carried both relief and challenge. Lady Beatrice's gasp was the only audible acknowledgment, a delicate exhalation of disbelief mingled with the faintest hint of admiration. The Duke's eyes softened as he turned back to his wife, to the woman who had endured exile and secrecy with grace and courage. "We shall face the world together," he said, the statement carrying the weight of promise, protection, and love unbroken by years of absence. "And we shall do so not merely as husband and wife, but as a family bound by truth, resilience, and the enduring strength of our hearts." The seamstress, no longer merely a figure of labor and concealment, allowed herself a rare and fleeting smile. "Then let us begin, my lord," she whispered, her voice carrying the intimacy of shared history and the quiet triumph of survival. "For too long we have lived in shadow. Let the light of acknowledgement guide us now." The Duke nodded, drawing her into a tentative embrace, careful not to overwhelm the delicate equilibrium of emotion that had been so painstakingly restored. The child, sensing the intimacy and safety, nestled closer, completing the tableau of a family reunited against the odds. Outside, the rain had softened into a gentle mist, the world holding its breath as if acknowledging the resolution of a story that had long awaited its proper cadence. The Duke, his hands still entwined with hers, regarded the child with a mixture of awe and quiet determination. "You are both my anchor and my compass," he murmured, each word deliberate, each syllable a vow. "Together, we navigate a world that may judge, yet we shall endure as we always have, in truth and in love." The seamstress' eyes glimmered with unshed tears, a quiet acknowledgement of the journey that had led them to this moment of reckoning and promise. In the days that followed, the Ashbourne estate began to breathe anew, corridors filled with measured laughter, careful conversation, and the subtle gestures of familial intimacy that had been absent for so long. Guests and neighbors, once the architects of idle gossip, came to learn the truth, met with the unwavering composure of a duke and duchess who had reclaimed not only their status but their dignity. Every ribbon, every stitch, every gesture carried the weight of history, memory, and love reasserted, each small token a testament to the endurance of the human heart against the tides of circumstance. Evenings were no longer dominated by isolation or silence. Candlelight danced across walls that had witnessed grief and longing, illuminating the renewed joy of a family reunited. The child's laughter, bright and unrestrained, filled rooms that had once echoed only with whispers and memory, and the Duke and his wife moved through their daily lives with a grace tempered by trials, their bond deepened by adversity and revelation. Each glance, each careful word, carried the unspoken knowledge that their love had endured, that their reunion was both rare and sacred, and that the world, though ever watchful, could not diminish what had been reclaimed. As twilight settled over the Ashbourne estate, the Duke stood once more at the window of the east wing, gazing out over the frost-kissed gardens. His wife's hand found his, their fingers entwined in quiet affirmation, while the child sat nearby, wooden horse in hand, a living emblem of love's continuity. The world beyond might harbor judgment, speculation, and intrigue, yet within the walls of the estate, truth and love reigned supreme, delicate but unbreakable. The final threads of secrecy, confession, and recognition had woven a tapestry of hope, resilience, and familial unity, each stitch a testament to courage, discretion, and the enduring power of the human heart. And so, in the waning winter light of 1816, the Duke of Ashbourne, his beloved wife restored to him, and their son, whose eyes mirrored his own, embraced a future both uncertain and radiant. Together, they navigated the delicate balance of society and desire, of duty and devotion, of scandal and propriety, finding in each other a sanctuary against the world. In the quiet glow of candlelight and the lingering scent of lavender and silk, the impossible had become reality, and the story that had begun in loss and uncertainty reached its poignant, triumphant resolution, an enduring testament to love rediscovered, courage reclaimed, and hearts united across the fragile yet unbreakable tapestry of time.